All right, so going back to it, so foundations of customer advocacy at scale. What, in terms of Lane, like how does data and customer advocacy turn into sort of that advocacy funnel? What do those words even mean? What is an advocacy funnel?
So let's first start with like the definition of an advocate, right? We talk about this a lot just because that helps us understand what it is to help with that foundation. So an advocate is someone who's willing to speak positively about your brand with or without you in the room, right? And so that's a piece that we really want to narrow in on, because sometimes you get the people too who are like, we'll give you all of the praises, but then when you're not in the room, they don't. So how do we make sure that we really capture those? And so what we do with that is we complement it with data, right? So the data that we need to know is things from like our voice of customer program. So when someone is not being feeling like they're cornered to say positive things, that they're giving those responses. So that's how you start to form them, right? So there's things like your NPS program, things that you might find on G2 Crowd, Trust Radius. So by bringing that data in for what they're saying about you already and the feedback that they're giving you to identify that advocate and that need helps to start building that funnel, right? And when we think about a funnel of advocacy or a waterfall even, things at the top tier can be very simple. It could be the account logo. It could be a simple quote. But then as we go down that waterfall, or maybe we flip that, like a webinar is like the number one piece of value to any customer marketer, because you have a video, you have a testimonial, you can convert it to a case study, you get quotes, right? So you get a lot of things within that you can start pulling through. But we also want to make sure that we're scaling to identify those advocates. So that's where you're starting to pull in programs such as Net Promoter Score, which is the question of how likely are you to recommend this organization to a friend or colleague. And by that, we know that people who say they're a 9 or a 10, those are people who are telling you that they are actively promoting your business to someone else, right? So that's where we can start by scaling those advocates. Other ways to think about with this is, how do you create a place for people to self-select in? So one of the things that my team is working on right now is there a web page or something that we can create that people can find when they're looking for what Gainsight advocacy is? And then they can self-select into that. So we're making sure that we're creating something once and allowing people to reuse it multiple times. But then at the same time, now as we're thinking about this funnel and scaling, we really also need to move an advocate through that funnel, right? We want to make sure that someone who is willing to give you a quick quote is in the future willing to do a deep case study, right? So being able to identify quick but lower value advocacy all the way up to something that's a high value advocacy for your organization and for the customer or that user. So as you're thinking about that, what are those quick wins? And those are going to be early on in that advocate life cycle, but then all the way through as they mature in their life cycle with you, also being able to help create them as a thought leader in their industry, right? So how do you and that advocate get credit for the work that you're doing together?
And just to add to that, this is something that I've also been thinking about for quite a while. And there was a blog post that I wrote for the Success League maybe almost a year ago called Customer Success Advocacy Umbrellas, or Customer Advocacy Umbrellas, essentially. And that's also the idea where you think about it from the customer perspective. You literally put yourself in your customer's shoes and think about, like, why do they want to participate in this? What do they get from it? And what Lane was just talking about in terms of building that thought leadership, helping them become thought leaders in the space, like that is an amazing, amazing thing to help your customers achieve. I know I was helping someone who was getting into a CSM role a while back when I was coaching someone, and literally she had helped get 6 of her customers promoted, right? I was like, oh my God, put that as a highlight on your resume. Like when you help people get promoted, right? When they become thought leaders, like that is something that you want to wear as a badge as well, right? How many thought leaders have you formed in the last, quarter or year or in your career? Like, think about that. That's an amazing thing. If you're working in this world of advocacy, that's an amazing thing to help your customers achieve, right?
And other things to think about too is like we want to help our customers succeed and we want to help our business succeed. So sometimes I'm working with organizations and they're trying to like figure out how to create more advocacy, but they're struggling maybe on a particular team, right? The CSM is like, my job is to make sure customers don't churn, right? But a piece of that is if they're successful and they're advocating, they are less likely to churn and they're more likely to renew and upsell. We also know, everyone will ask me where I found the quote. I don't have the link to it. But a few years ago, I was reading an article that said that successful advocates can help land like 6 or 7 deals, right? So thinking about like how the exponential impact of an advocate, of like I have one customer who's advocating, maybe it's not even the account, maybe it's a person at the account, and that person can help land 6 to 7 other deals. So thinking about advocacy in a net new perspective as well with the sales team. So being able on that front of like creating successful customers who are willing to advocate not only helps your net retention goals, but also helps that new business pipeline as well.
So let's also maybe before we go to the breakout rooms, Lynn, can you talk a little bit about like when we were talking before, you were talking about like NPS 9s and 10s and using them, to create the funnel, how you are building advocacy programs and pulling customers in and how you nurture them and amplify them. Like in a typical day or when you're planning for a new year or a new quarter, what tangibly does that look like? What do you do?
Yeah. So as we're looking at that, we use our NPS as our starting. That's our pool. So when we think about it, we know around what our NPS number is going to be. So we can back into how many promoters we're going to have because of our response rate. So we know we will have a pool of advocates of a certain amount. For round numbers, let's say 100. It's higher than that, but let's do round numbers. So when we take that and we can say, okay, where do we need advocacy across our business, right? And so is it G2 reviews? Is it case study? Is it testimonials? Is it speaking opportunities? And then also being able to kind of divide that out to say, okay, do we have enough advocacy to cross all of these, right? So that's how we're starting to, when we approach a year, we start to think about this of like, okay, what do we believe our bucket is based on historics? And then what do we need to do to help fill that gap? But then as we're working with our customers, how we kind of pull them through there is we help show them that value to them in each moment that they do something. So how do we reward them, right? So I can't give everyone $100 every time they say something good about Gainsight, but I can incentivize or just have those happy moments. So Dan and Chip Heath have a book, The Power of Moments. So how do we make sure that those peaks are higher? And so that they're more memorable. So we think about that too, of like, how do we reward those customers in that moment, but then also nurturing them along. So one of the big projects that we're working on this year is the life cycle of an advocate. What does that look like? Where can they expect to have moments with us so that they can also, we can provide back to them the value of being an advocate of Gainsight, right? Because if you continually take and debit or take credits against someone, you're going to end up with no money in that bank anymore, right? So how do we provide deposits back to those advocates? And then that's how we help to nurture those customers along. But then we end up in the amplification phase. How do we also help amplify their message? That's things like, how do we get them into LinkedIn? How do we get them focused on blog posts? And how do we also help share that value together, right? So how do we create amplification across our business and the industry as well? So those are different moments that we think about in the advocate life cycle that we're trying to build even more this year as we think about it. We have great partnership with our content marketing team. And so for us at Gainsight, across our sales team, our marketing team, our customer success and ops team, and our customer success team, we all have a goal around advocacy and case studies this year. So it is that is something that if you can get a cross-functional buy-in across your organization to have a company level metric, that's going to help you drive your advocacy even more.
And this also fits into the idea of customer-led growth, right? When you're looking at customer-led growth, it is your customers that are driving your growth. So if you invest in your customers also invest back in you, right? In lots of ways, by whether it be becoming advocates, which if you think about like marketing, right? All the money you spend on marketing, and people don't necessarily believe it. What do they want after they look at all that marketing? They want to talk to somebody who's actually a customer, right? So they still want to talk to your customer, even though you've spent all that money on marketing. So it's really the voice of your customers is really powerful, right? And so when you think about it, think about all those other, communities that you're in, and people are saying, oh yeah, I'm looking for a CS tool, or I'm looking for a productivity tool, or whatever it might be. I'm looking for something. Do you have any suggestions? That is advocates at work for you, right? And so when you think about the experience that they have, the goals that they're achieving, all of those things help make them an advocate, right? And when you think about even the sneakers that you wear, do you tell somebody, hey, you should wear them? That's like a B2C version, right? Of sneakers. What am I doing all the time? I'm always showing books, right? I'm an advocate for books, right? I gotta say, I've seen her in webinars. I'm a devout follower of her, a devotee, devout follower, whatever I am. I like Britt Adriata, right? You know that. I haven't met her yet. I still need to, right? Like I will tell you all the time how much I love her, but like you can connect this at scale, right? It isn't just through one-on-one. You can do it at scale, right? We see examples of that all the time. And it doesn't have to be like this major, like developed program, like what Lane has already built at Gainsight. If you look at the advocacy umbrella article, I show like how you can take what you're doing today, as little or as much as it might be, and turn it into an advocacy program, right? So
it can be as simple as that piece of just asking, right? Like, what do you like about the product, or things like that? And one of the things, like, every person here has been an advocate for something. I mean, if someone coming to you and saying, where should I eat dinner? Right? You're advocating for something. And it's that piece, because like, when you think about that, especially in the B2C world, you're not in the same room as the person or the thing that you're recommending. But in the B2B world, that might happen, right? And so being able to look at that as well. So one of the things we haven't solved for, but is something in the industry to think about too, is those advocates who are advocates without you being there. Right. So because what happens in B2B is you also end up getting backdoor references, and you want to make sure that the people out there that end up doing a backdoor reference are also speaking positively about you. Backdoor meaning like they didn't come through the organization to request that reference. They found it on their own.
All right. So we're about to go to breakout sessions, right? So that's why I keep putting those links over so that you see them over the side. Please open that up. I'm going to just share my screen for a second. And where am I?
Is there time for questions, Jan?
Yeah. What?
I was wondering if there's time for question from you.
Yeah, sure.
Are you open to that, Lane? We didn't talk about this in advance.
That's okay.
Go for it. What is it?
Well, I was curious. I think the hardest part is the attribution. Right. So I'm really curious about how Gainsight, or how you actually look at attribution. Did they buy more products because of the advocacy work, and how do you measure the attribution?
Yeah. One of the things that we're doing right now, and what we can track more one-to-one, right? So that's going to be our reference management process. We do track if certain references are more likely to land a deal, or if there are certain references that they just aren't good. Like I had a customer once, I was talking to her, and she had built this robust thing in Salesforce to tell her that answer, right? To tell her who the best advocates were and who weren't. And she found out that the one customer that every sales rep wanted to talk to their prospect actually had a horrible conversion rate. So by having that data, she could go back to the sales team and say, please stop self-selecting and let us do that for you, because we're going to get a better match, right? And so for us right now, what we're doing on an attribution front is the one-to-one piece. So being able to say, you met with this person, what was the outcome? But we're also working on, as we build more, when we do things like we're working on a customer spotlight / one-to-many reference, being able to say, those who attended this, did they buy did an opportunity close, or did a new one get created within 60 days of that? So being able to kind of build those pieces together. And this ends up being where our friends in marketing and the friends in success start to come together, because while some of these programs are being ran out of customer success, we need customer marketing metrics to bridge that together. And so as you're seeing more on advocacy and digital customer success, a lot of the metrics are going to be customer success with a marketing flair on them.
And that's a great thing that you just raised, is when you think about it, for anything that you're doing, you always want to measure, right? Because otherwise you don't know if what you're doing is actually successful, if it's having the impact that you're hoping. Otherwise you might continue having, somebody give references that actually doesn't actually help you make those sales, right? And ultimately you do want to know that. You want to know, if you have someone who's featured in a webinar, if that turns into great leads and opportunities. You want to know, as well as you want to help your customer become that thought leader and all of those things, right? Like, it's a partnership, but you also want to know, if you do feature them, have they, maybe there's other things you might want to do with helping them get their name out there, because right now, not enough people are coming to the webinar. Or maybe whenever they do a webinar, it's not a lot of people, but boy, the people who come zero in on that topic. And so they are great, like you can figure out if there's still great conversions, even if they're more specific, or any of those things. Those are the things you only know if you learn from it, if you measure it, if you track it.
And the piece to it, I mean, I know you want a slight tangent, hopefully I'm going to try and wrap it up in 20 to 30 seconds here, is your metric can change even though you're doing a similar thing, right? The first time you do something, it might just be to get a baseline, right? And the second time you do something, it might be improve on something else. So my analogy with this is running a half marathon. The first time you run a half marathon, it's usually, I just want to finish 13.1 miles. And then the second time might be, I want to run the entire thing. And then after that, it's, I want to get a certain time frame. So you're doing the same thing, but your metric for success is changing.
Yeah. All right. So these are the breakout questions. And as usual, a lightning round of introductions. Want to think about how have you advocated for a brand recently, to kind of help sort of connect in with the idea, whether it's B2C or B2B. What does advocacy look like at your organization, whether you're in one currently or maybe your more recent one, and then what motions can be scaled to support your goals. And we've given some suggestions based upon different types of roles. So I want to be sure that you think about that. And let's see, we've got about 33 people. So I'm going to do 11 groups, or 32 people. I'll do 10 groups. And that way, let's see.
Hey, Jan, I have to leave in a few minutes, so you may want to put me as like an extra on a group, put me in a
It's
larger
all
group.
automatically assigned. So
okay.
You can apologize to the folks you get set up with.
Sounds good.
All right, but thanks, Kimberly, appreciate it. Okay, so how was that? What are some takeaways that we had in those breakout sessions? What are some learnings? Anybody want to start volunteering?
We found out that we have the same bone to pick with Peloton.
They went out of business. How rude of them.
Did they really go out?
No, they did it. They did it. We had very similar complaints that we are going to put our suggestions in the suggestion box.
So we got the reverse of advocacy actually happening in our session. So
Isn't that the problem though? People are talking about your brand behind your back. And I bet, Lane, Gary, and Marianne probably had already somehow submitted their feedback to Peloton, but they're not listening.
Mhm.
I think that's a takeaway for me, right? Like you maybe submitted a ticket, you probably, talk to someone, the salesperson, or maybe even the instructor.
No,
Well,
I agree. I
But
think their
think
customer
about that. But think about that. So I know, like, they had a large support team, and I know a bunch of people who got laid off, right?
Yep.
So think about that. Think about the layoffs that have been happening, to customer success and support, in our SaaS tech world. And there's absolutely a corollary. Like what is happening to that customer experience, and our company's aware of it, right?
Absolutely. I will say their support is lacking because I've had issues and I've ordered clothing and I've had issues with incorrect orders coming in and they took really long and they won't respond to your emails. So I have quite a laundry list of complaints.
And so even though support is different from customer success, right? Support is meant to be reactive. Customer success is meant to be, proactive and strategic, right? But still, if you don't have a good support motion as part of that customer experience, that is going to have a major impact on your customers and what you're able to do. That also then points out if there's customer friction or product gaps, right? So, that's the kind of stuff you want to record back and send back to your product team.
But I think it really takes like that role, someone that's looking at the whole experience, and typically is probably the CCO, someone that's tying it all together, right? Because the support leaders like, how quickly can I end my calls? And the CS leaders like, I'm looking at retention number, or who's looking at that experience holistically.
And the piece to it is like, it is the overarching voice of customer program, right?
Mhm.
So when you're thinking about that, it's things like NPS, CSAT, support responses, customer effort score. And so pulling all of those together, like that's how we got information on certain aspects of their experience with Gainsight that influenced what we call our OPSP, or our one-page strategic plan for the year. And it also became the initiative within engineering and product to improve certain things. And so we took that data from NPS, we helped tell the story of what those customers and admins were experiencing. And since we've implemented that process of that NPS into the OPSP, we've seen an improvement in our NPS scores for certain demographics and personas and users, because we were able to show the change and we had that cross-functional buy-in in it.
And I'm just was sharing, there's this article that Jason Lumpkin wrote called Why You Should Have a VP of Free. And it's the same sort of idea with that, right? That even if you have an area of your product that isn't monetized, you need to pay attention to it because it's part of that customer journey and the way that it informs your product overall. So it's just, anyway, I put that in the chat. I'm going to put it over in the Slack.
Oh, I already did.
Oh, did you? Oh, you're ahead of me.
Doing it
Okay,
right
good.
now. Yep.
Well, I see measuring attribution or something. Oh, there you go.
There
I
we go.
see it now.
Just
All right,
push.
never mind. But yeah. Now, Christine Kukic, is that how you pronounce your last name? Kukic. Kukic. All right. Sorry, I'm horrible with names, but I really do.
Well, just think, Jan, my husband's a chef.
Kukic.
There you go.
Good prompt.
A cook with an itch. I know you were always, thinking about customer marketing and that sort of thing. Have you been trying to build sort of advocacy programs over at Thought Industries as well?
Yeah, we are working through what advocacy means to us from the standard perspective of the NPS, because we do, of course, have the Gainsight NPS score push out every 6 months. And so there's that part to it. And then we're launching the customer stories part to get the word out about the value that we have as a program. And but that's just in the infancy stages. I just launched my customer of the month program 2 months ago. So we only have, I'm recording the third story this week. And that is just 3 questions. it's much along the lines, Jan, we had that conversation in one of the sessions about NPS is not really, may not be the one you really want, right?
Mhm,
From
yeah.
a numbers game.
Yeah, there's
so
so
what
many
we did
reasons
is,
why I hate NPS, yeah.
yeah, and we, again, a whole other conversation. It's recorded somewhere. Go listen. It was great. But the base idea is that we wanted question and answers, not numbers, right? So we took three basic questions for the customer of the month. The first one is just, who are you? Right? How does our tool fit into your environment? How does, what do you do? And then the second one is, why us? Why did you pick our product? What was the big incentive? And then the third one is, where do you see your program in the next 18 to 24 months? Right? Which tells for us a better story than just the numbers games could. And it allows us to use it across a wider variety of media and modalities.
Yeah, that's fun.
I can easily turn it into text. I can turn it into, we're going to start running a crawl across, or a carousel. I'm not sure yet which. Again, I don't have enough yet to show the difference, but probably carousel on our page with all of our case studies, which are text-based for the most part. We do have some video, but most of them are text-based. And these are just quick, right? They're 3-minute videos that say YTI.
Awesome. That also made me think of, I put in the resources link on the slides. So when you're in Slack, you can see that, or you might see that in this chat chat. Anyway, in the chat, the slides. Anyway, but Joel Kletke, I just discovered him on LinkedIn. Do you already know about him, Christine?
Yeah, I do.
He's doing such a unique approach to case studies and ways that he's making them interactive and that sort of thing. So he's another good person to follow.
And then we're doing standard referrals too, but we're tracking the references. We're not using any tools necessarily. We're just leveraging the referenceability field in Salesforce.
Yeah.
To track it. And the CSMs are managing that field, right? It's their responsibility to make sure it's updated with a yes or a no.
Okay.
Because they're the ones who know the best about the customer's state of mind.
Now, Lane, that might be a controversial statement for you, right?
It can be.
Tell me about that. That was very interesting when we were talking before.
I'm sorry. Give me one more piece of it. I was following Joel real quick, so I caught part of it.
So we were talking about. She was saying, that CSMs know the customer best and should keep the information updated. And are they a good person, or have they agreed to be part of case studies and that sort of thing? And I know that you feel differently sometimes about that.
You jogged my memory. Thank you.
Yeah.
One of the things that we talk a lot about here is advocate doesn't mean account, right? And so a lot of times CSM like narrows in on the account, right? The account's at risk. Like they just had turnover here, or these things. And what we look at a lot is an advocate is not a company. An advocate is a person.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And
it's at the person level.
Yeah. And so one of the ways that we've helped debunk that myth here is we had several people who we knew were some of our top advocates, and we highlighted them in the way that would tell everyone why they wouldn't be an advocate, right? So one of them, we were like, this person is now at a company that uses a competitor of ours. This person, their last company churned Gainsight, right? But it was still our one of our top references against a competitor, because she knew what Gainsight was like, and she could easily pull up our competitor on a call and be like, and this is what I work with, right? And then we also looked at things like someone who had been at multiple companies, right? And he had a detractor NPS, right? Because he held us to such a high standard, but he was the biggest advocate for why you should invest in CS operations. And so when you look at just the data of the account, it's like red flags, right? Do not talk to this person. And that's why CSMs, sometimes we have to balance that of like, yes, an account can be at risk, but there can still be advocates within that organization.
And if you're going to build an advocate program, it is at the person level, for sure, for sure.
Yep.
right? It's all based on the unique discussions that one person can have in all of those various formats, whatever that happens to be, blog posts, presentations at user conferences,
Exactly.
webinars, right? All of those things that people can get involved in
Mhm.
that make them thought leaders and to help their personal brands in addition to the potential conversion rate they can work on for us.
And it's more likely that we're going to find people for that, right? It's more likely that we're going to find people who want to elevate their personal brand. It's also because it is very rare, not a non-existent, but it is rare when you have an organization that says, I want to put my name, my organization's name next to your organization's name, right? Over the last 2.5 years that I've been doing advocacy, I think twice, and maybe that's even more a higher hit rate than most organizations. I've had 2 people come to me and say, what is your co-branding approach? Because we want to do a joint PR. We want to do a joint press release. And we were like, wait a second, we don't usually get this request. And so like we had to figure out how to manage through that. Thought Industries might have been one of the 2.
We were one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
That's awesome. Were there any other sort of learnings, aha moments that someone had today, or like, oh, I better go look this up, or oh, so glad someone shared this with me?
I'm kind of curious whether you think the advocacy is actually just companies and individuals in the company, because here's my story. I advocated for Gainsight, even though I have never used Gainsight. But I know the people that work there, Tim and Lane and others. And so what happened is I was talking to somebody else in a big company who's a Gainsight customer. And he was telling me about his experience with not his experience with Gainsight, but the fact that he's contracting issues. If you're a current customer, big customer, and he's one small division that's trying to use Gainsight, problems with implementation, having trouble getting support. I'm like, that just doesn't sound like Gainsight to me. So I took it upon myself to write a note to Tim to tell him to say, look, this somebody from this really big account of yours is not having a good experience.
Yeah.
And so I'm an advocate for Gainsight, not because they're going to do something for me, but because I like the people that work there.
And that's a piece to it, right? Like we talked about it earlier, is like an advocate is someone who's willing to talk positively about your brand with or without you in the room, right? You aren't a user of Gainsight. You know, a lot of us here, and here's a piece that some people miss, right? And having been a CSM at Gainsight for 3 or 4 years, people don't just buy Gainsight for the platform. They buy it for the thought leadership. So while you might not be a customer of the platform, you are a customer of the thought leadership, right? So you are using your engagement with Gainsight to advocate on it, right? And so that's those pieces that you have to think about too. So as you're, we are fortunate at Gainsight to be an industry or category creator. Not everyone is, but I mean, thinking about it, Taylor was in our group earlier, and he has to advocate for his partners and his business and his customers being in the payment industry, right? How do you like advocate for PayPal over Stripe over someone else? And being in that, being able to advocate and think about that too. And so with advocacy, it doesn't have to be a paying customer. It doesn't have to be a brand. It is honestly anyone who will speak positively about your brand with, or your product, or you with or without you in the room. So even thinking about it is like, in this situation here, Sandy advocated on my behalf to Jan. Sandy and I met once. She went to Jan, said, Jan, this person, I think we can have her on. We can talk about it, right? So it doesn't even have to be brand to brand or customer to brand. It can be individual to individual as well. And by Sandy doing that, she helps elevate and advocate for the Gainsight brand too, because we're helping get our thought leadership out there and through this, right? Things that I do and that I've learned about. And so advocacy becomes more encompassing than just, I am a customer of someone.
So I think the final thing is like the customer success community as a whole, like we are our brand. So people's experience with you is going to translate into how they feel about the products that you represent.
Right. Well, because a brand is very personal and your experience with a company or a product is very personal, right? You start to integrate it into your life. It starts to mean something. It saved you time. It made you money. Sure. But there was also whatever feeling, right? They always talk about that. What sort of brand feeling? And it's like, really, I don't know. I'm a apple pie turnover. Is that a feeling? But then you think about it. Apple pie turnover is kind of a feeling. Like, so you think about like what that is and what do you want your customers to feel as well, right? So it has an impact. It has a really big impact. Any other takeaways as we finish up today? Any other thoughts that you want to share? Aha moments? Thinking about it.
I think just in ours is the couple core themes were obviously like data, be able to just capture and track everything as much as possible, leverage in-house and third-party solutions as much as you can. And then the other we talked about heavily was ensuring that through all these different types of touch points that you are inviting diversity of like different types of customers, from size to personas, industry segments, all that, having that complete range, risk, not, performing really well, and make sure you have for where it's relevant, of course, especially like we were talking about customer advisory boards, things of that nature, like just really making sure you're inviting that diversity so that you could truly help the entire ecosystem.
Absolutely, because anytime you enter into a room and you feel like you don't belong there, that's a feeling too, right? You want to make certain that you're inclusive, and diversity is a big part of that inclusivity, right? And making certain that you have people who are going to be welcoming, and that you're not like, oh, I'm going to speak up for the women in the room now, because that's just me. So yes, the woman's perspective, I will now represent that to all of you or something, like that makes you feel weird. Right? Or like there's only two of you, even like you got to have a bunch of them. You got to have a bunch of people, so that's really important. In fact, in May, we're going to have one of the topics is going to be around DEI, because that's an important thing. It's an important thing in tech, it's an important thing in business, an important thing in community, an important thing in advocacy. It's just an important thing.
Totally. And that too. And what we were also just kind of getting to is just even the diversity of like the actual customer personas, meaning if you have a business that has multiple industries or size of like SMB enterprise, that
diversity of types of business.
Exactly. Yeah. Like literally everything, because that'll help the business grow in all different ways.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Great session today, folks. Really appreciate you coming at an earlier time. It was fantastic to see you all here. And thank you so much, Lane, for joining us.
Happy to. Love this. So excited to continue to be a part of the community.
Excellent.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Okay.
Good arms. Good arms.
Why you have to do that?
Right.
Sandy, you have to do
He's
that
got a
every
job at
meeting.
a used car lot.
Every meeting. That's how we're going to sign off. You have to do that.
You got it. Here we go, Lee. Everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of Success Hour, formerly known as CS Office Hours. We regularly put out new content, so to be the first to know, like this episode, tap that notification bell, hit that subscribe button, and we look forward to seeing you soon.